Hi everybody, welcome back to another video. So this video today is going to be a little different. Most of the videos I've been putting out have all been diet updates, and then some of the first ones were about how to diet and track macros. This video is going to be more about some actual principles and explanations of how to train properly. So as a personal trainer, one thing that I think is very important is not just training my clients so that they achieve the results that they want, but also educating them so that they don't always need a personal trainer forever. After training with me for a year or two, for the most part, you should know enough to be able to work out on your own and train yourself on your own and continue to make progress. You shouldn't need someone there holding your hand for the entire rest of your life. And that's something I don't see with a lot of other personal trainers that has always bothered me. It's people intentionally keep information from their clients and keep their clients in the dark so that they have to keep coming back to the personal trainer. And that's not something I want to do. So today's video is going over not a specific question that I get a lot, but something that a lot of my clients don't fully understand, and that's how hard you should be training. This is a complicated question, and most of the time I can tell when people don't really understand it. When I'm asking them to push a little harder, or we make our workouts harder, and people ask, can't we just do something easier like we did last week? And the answer is no, and it's not no just because I'm being mean and trying to push you harder. The answer is no for several specific reasons, and so I'm going to cover those in this video today. So, our question is, how hard should you be training? And as I answer this question, there are three rules or principles that I want to point out first, and then I'll be going over and explaining each one of those. So the first principle is your goals do not influence how you train. So whether you're training to lose fat or to build muscle, your training is not affected by those goals. It's not going to change how you should be training or how hard you should be training. With both of those goals, when it comes to lifting weights, we are trying to stimulate muscle growth all the time. If you're not actually eating enough to gain weight, your muscles aren't going to grow bigger. What happens, so if you're trying to lose fat, if your training, your weightlifting is stimulating muscle growth, but you're not eating enough, then your muscles don't grow, they recover from your lifting and they stay the same size. And your overall body weight goes down because you lose fat. That's why it's so important, as I've said before, if you're trying to lose fat, it's important to lift weights and not just diet or just cardio. By lifting weights, we can keep the amount of muscle mass we have, and that guarantees that the weight we're losing is coming just from fat. So fat loss, muscle gain doesn't affect how you train. You should be training hard in both of those cases. Principle number 2. So the simple answer to how hard you should train is hard enough. And hard enough is training that gives you the best possible results for your goal. These best results are often, always brought about by the most and the hardest training that you can do and still recover. The recovery part here is key. There is an amount of training that you can do too much weightlifting where you don't recover, and not only will you not make progress, then you can actually regress and move backwards. So obviously you shouldn't train that much or that hard so that you move backwards. That's not good. And our third and last principle is for the best results at the best possible rate, so making these results as fast as we can or as close to as fast as we can, your training must be overloading. And again, I'll explain in just a second what overloading means. But this last point is important because it basically says that, as long as you're lifting weights and doing something, you're probably making progress. But, I'm sure that none of you who want to lose weight, if you have 20 pounds to lose, you'd like to lose that in, a few months, which is reasonable, not a few years. And if you're not training hard enough, it might take you a few years. Your progress can be that much slower by not training optimally. So, back to rule number one, or principle number one, just a little further explanation on why our overall goals, so fat loss, muscle gain, don't influence how we train. So pretty clear with muscle gain, you're trying to build muscle, you need to be eating enough calories so that you're gaining weight, and ideally most of that weight gained is new muscle that's created. When you're trying to lose weight and lose fat, again, this is dictated by your diet, not your training. So you have to be eating in a calorie deficit to lose weight. And by lifting weights, like I said, the process of lifting weights stimulates our muscles to grow. When you're eating in a calorie deficit, you're not actually going to grow new muscle. It basically just repairs the muscle damage that occurs during weightlifting. During weightlifting, your muscles are damaged, they break down a little bit, and instead of growing back to their baseline and then growing new muscle, because you don't have enough calories for all that, they just go back to baseline. Your muscle stays where it is. And you use a lot of calories and a lot of energy just getting back to baseline, and you end up with not enough calories left over basically just to survive. And that's when your body has to use fat stores for that energy. If you weren't lifting weights, if you were just doing cardio or diet, then there isn't this big energy demand to repair your muscles. And then, when you're not eating enough calories to survive, your body could break down fat for energy, but it can also break down muscle for energy. And if you're not lifting weights, you don't really have any control over which one of those two tissues your body breaks down. And while your goal is to lose weight, really we just want to be losing fat. If you lost 20 pounds, but you didn't lose any fat, you wouldn't look any better, and nobody would really want that, even though you're 20 pounds lighter. You want to be 20 pounds lighter and have 20 pounds less fat. So lifting weights is very important when we're trying to lose fat. In summary, lifting weights gets us back to our baseline level of muscle that we have, so that all the weight we lose comes from fat. So our lifting, the way we train, how hard we train, should be the same for fat loss and muscle gain, because you're trying to break down that muscle and stimulate muscle to grow and recover. Alright, so let's move on to principle number 2. Principle number 2, we should be training hard enough to get the best results. So that's the most and the hardest training that you can do and still recover. So recovery is an important point. You want to train hard. You should probably at sometimes be sore from training. You can have low energy levels from having several hard workouts, especially if you're dieting for fat loss. But we define recover as being able to do the same amount of work that you've previously done in a workout or better. So for example, if you came in and you did a squat workout and you did 95 pounds for 3 sets of 10, and the next week you come in and no matter how hard you try, you're pushing yourself to the absolute limit, you just, for some reason, you're so sore and beat up, you can't do 95 for 3 sets of 10. You can only do 8 reps. You're just too exhausted. That's an example of not recovering. An important thing here, obviously, is that some of recovery comes down to you. If you don't push yourself hard enough, if you're just tired and you decide to stop at 8 reps, even though you could have done 10, you're not having a good day, you're extra tired, you can't say then that you didn't recover. Maybe you just didn't have enough energy to match your performance. So recovery is a little tricky. That's not necessarily something that most beginners or people hiring a personal trainer need to be thinking about in depth. That's something you can think in the back of your mind, and that's something that I watch and gauge based on not just one exercise, but how all of your exercises go in the entire session. And usually, if somebody does poorly at one exercise but not all of the other ones, maybe they're just tired, maybe they're a little sore, they're tight, they need to be warmed up better, maybe they have a lot going on and their head just really isn't in it, but oftentimes that'll only affect maybe one exercise, a very difficult compound one like squats, but they'll do fine on all their other exercises. So typically that suggests that they're recovered. Let's move on to point number 3. For the best results at the best rate, your training must be overloading. So overload, what does that mean? So lots of times people talk about when you're lifting weights, whether or not you should lift heavy for low reps or light for high reps. There's lots of myths and misconceptions about this, that heavy and low reps builds muscle, and that lightweight and high reps is for leaning or toning. And again, everybody knows now, we all know that this isn't true. Building muscle or losing fat comes from our diet, not how we train. So you can build muscle doing lightweight and high reps, just like you can lose fat doing heavyweight and low reps. There is somewhat of a range for how light to how heavy is acceptable. And this is actually a very big range. So if you look at the most amount of weight that you can lift in any exercise for one rep, most of the time you want to be between 60 and 90% of the max weight you can lift. That'll keep your rep ranges somewhere between 15 and 6 or 5 reps. And that's where we want to spend most of our time training, with heavy-ish weights between 60 and 90% for 15 to 6-ish reps. You can obviously still go even lighter than 60% and perform more reps. Most studies show that up to about 30 reps, so that would be like 30% of your 1 rep max, is about the lightest weight that you can use and still stimulate your muscles enough to get the same impact as if you were lifting heavier. And remember, we want to stimulate our muscles for fat loss or for muscle gain. We want to stimulate them as much as possible and still recover. So the downside of training with super light weight and having to go and do 30 reps is, how do you know that you're pushing yourself just as hard at 30 reps as you are if you're doing heavy weight and you're only doing 8 reps? And how you judge that effort is by how close you get to failure. So, the most weight we can lift for 1 rep, that's 1 rep, and then we fail if we try to do another rep. If you're training, so most of the time in training, we don't want to actually fail. We want to be pretty close to failure. Somewhere between 5 and 2 reps short of failure most of the time. So that means If you're squatting 95 pounds and you do 8 reps, you should be able to, at most 100%, giving everything you've got, you should be able to do 13 to 10 reps. So we're not going all the way to failure. We're not doing all the reps we can. We're close to it. So somewhere between 5 and 2 reps left in the tank. With heavier weight and lower reps, it's easier to gauge that. You can get to 8 reps and be like, okay, you know what? I know I can do 1 more rep. I could maybe do 2, and if my personal trainer is just screaming at me and really motivating me, I could possibly grind out that 3rd one, but I'm not sure. And so you're pretty close to failure. You know that you're pushing hard enough. When you're doing very lightweight and very high reps, like 30 reps, it gets a lot harder to tell if you're actually that close to failure. The weight's pretty light, it's not that strenuous, and you can just kind of keep doing reps and keep going. And if it gets light enough that you can do more than 30 reps, the weight isn't heavy enough to stimulate enough muscle fibers to get as much out of it as if you were doing heavier weight with 8 reps. So while very lightweight can be used sometimes, I don't recommend it often, just because it's harder to push yourself actually all the way to failure, like it is with lighter reps. So the first part of overload has to do with how heavy the weight is and basically being reasonably close to failure. So 5 to 2 reps from failure. The other part of overloading has to do kind of with recovering. So remember we said we recover when we do as much weight for as many reps as we have previously done. Well, whenever you lift weights or perform any kind of athletic activity, even running, etc., when things are challenging, the challenge presents something for your body, your muscles, your nervous system to overcome. And the more times you're presented with this difficult task, the better your body becomes at adapting to it, and that task gets easier. So squatting 95 pounds, the more times you do that, the easier it becomes. So the second part of overloading is for something that you have already done. So you've done squats, 95 pounds for 3 sets of 10. The first time you ever do that, it's going to be very hard, very challenging. That's a lot of reps, you're really tired, and it's sufficiently heavy. You can't do 95 pounds for 3 sets of 10 anymore and be challenged to the same extent. If you do it again, it's not going to be as challenging, and you're not going to get as much out of it. So we have to either add more weight for the same amount of reps, or do the same weight for more reps or more sets. By increasing any of those things, we are able to increase the amount of work we're doing, increase the difficulty of it, and match the same stimulus to our muscles so that we can make sure we're getting as much out of it. So that in particular is why even if you had a hard workout one week, you can't come in the next week and do the same workout and get as much out of it. It will still feel difficult to you in your head, but as far as your muscles, they're not stimulated to the same degree. It's not a new unknown stimulus. They're familiar with it. All right? So that's why over time we have to progress our training and progressively overload, progressively do heavier weight, more reps, and more sets, so that we are always stimulating our muscles to this very high degree so that we can get the most results out of it at the quickest possible rate. So if we were only doing the same weight every week, this is where things really slow down. Is squatting 95 pounds for 3 sets of 10 still challenging? Yes. So are you still getting something out of it? Yes. But remember, the more times you do that, the better your body gets at doing it, and it becomes less and less challenging over time. So now your progress is going to slow down a lot. That's why we don't train like that. We make sure that our training gets harder and harder each week so that you can get to your goals faster and make not only the best possible results, but you can make them in the best possible amount of time. Now, this is a picture of a graph. It was made by a guy named Greg Nuckols on his website Strength Theory. And this graph summarizes a number of scientific studies that look at different rep ranges and their effects on hypertrophy, which is muscle stimulation basically, muscle growth. It looks at strength development, and it looks at muscular endurance. And so I'll summarize this real quickly, but for the most part, they had people lift weights and they had them work out at different rep ranges and at different relative difficulties. So the people at the low rep ranges were lifting heavier weights at a higher difficulty. The people in the higher rep ranges were lifting lighter weights at a lighter difficulty. And they recorded everyone doing all of these different types of lifting, and they measured how much hypertrophy and how much strength and how much endurance they got. And what the study found was that there's no difference in hypertrophy between all of the rep ranges as long as the proximity to failure was the same. So if you go 2 reps from failure and you only do 5 reps, you'll get just as much out of it as if you do 2 reps from failure and you do 28 reps. So this is an example of some of the scientific studies that support and explain to us how hard we should be training. As we progress over time, we can start off a little further from failure, maybe 5 reps, and each week we add a little bit of weight or some reps or some sets, and we push a little bit closer to failure, up to 2 reps from failure. And as long as you are doing that, you're progressively doing more over time. It doesn't really matter your exact reps or the percentage of your 1 rep max that's on the bar. As long as you progress those over time, you are training hard enough to make results and make progress and do it at the fastest and best possible rate. I hope this video has been helpful, and if anyone has any questions about this or training in general, I would love to hear them, and please feel free to leave those questions or other comments below. Thank you.